The broadcast attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending another SLCan webinar series. Presenting today is Pete Cottle, and he's presenting on fire safety in the laboratory. Before we kind of get rolling here, if you have any questions, please enter them into the question field box, and we can get to those at the end of the presentation. And if there's any issues with audio or if anyone can't hear, please put them in the questions box too. So a bit about Pete. Pete is a highly technical professional with a demonstrated history of specializing in safety and hazardous storage, environmental protection, and the construction industries. He is skilled in risk analysis and risk mitigation. With his BA in biology and chemistry, he brings a unique point of view when working towards safe solutions. His passion and mission is focused in protecting our people, first responders, the environment, and our assets and research. So right now I'm going to hand things over to Pete, and he'll take you through the presentation. And again, questions and question period will be after the presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. Hey guys, I'm Pete Cottle, as Kevin mentioned. It was a great bio and such, but quite frankly, I'm just a safety nerd. So my intent today is to kind of walk us through this. Being it's over lunchtime, of course, I've got to feed you lunch. You know, that happens today in a virtual world. So I am from the US, so you know, you got great New York or Chicago style pizza, vegetarian option, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, being a webinar in a virtual world that we have to live in today, that's what I got. So poor humor. Hope you enjoyed your virtual food, and let me jump into this, and hopefully it's informative. As Kevin mentioned, please, if you got questions, get those in the chat. We'll take time after the presentation then to address those. So goal today is I want to talk about GHS symbols, so global harmonized system. Kind of what those means. We're going to talk about different types of flammables. Really going to concentrate on solids, liquids, and gases, right? Your traditional flammables that you'll find in laboratory space. At the end, time permitting, I've got a fun little video that I want to show you that talks about compressed flammable gases. Traditionally, that's a whole different presentation, but if I've got time, I'll show you that. If not, we'll fly back through it. Going to spend a lot of time talking about the fire triangle. As design professionals and manufacturers, that's the one thing that we can kind of help mitigate the dangers of fire. In the fire triangle, you've got three different sides, and if we can segregate those sides, then the possibility of fires or explosions don't necessarily exist. We'll look at storage and existing dangers, talk about ventilation, which traditionally is taboo. I'll tell you why my safety side, I will tell you why that to me that makes a lot of sense to ventilate. Both exposure and flammability and explosion type safeties can all be done through that process. So most importantly, we'll watch a lot of fun videos together. I could talk to you for hours and hours at a time on safety, but I'm not going to do that. Since you guys are muted and can't interact, I figured we'll watch some videos together that somewhat drive home or just discuss the points that I'll talk about as well. So ultimately, 4 learning objectives. It's all about the fire triangle, how we enhance safety for the occupants in the laboratory space without decreasing their efficiency or their process, right? In America, we talk a lot about the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. What I mean by that, and I don't mean that at all as a negative statement, but it's how do we keep it easy for these researchers to do their work, right? I have a biology chemistry degree. As I started out working in the laboratories, my #1 focus was doing my process and expecting everything around me to do that. So I know you guys all design amazing spaces with safety in mind, but how do we keep that then simpler for the researcher? I'm going to talk about ventilation again to reduce the risk of fire, explosion, and exposure to chemicals. It's kind of a 3-part savior, that ventilation for us. Ultimately, segregation and storage of chemicals per the GHS, which I'll define that for you in a couple slides. Material safety data sheet, MSDS or SDS, depending on how you guys use that analogy. And then ultimately, and most important, is education empowerment to provide fire protection. What I mean is, in your specifications, right in there, that whoever wins the tender needs to train the people how to use your technology and my technology together to create that safe environment. So let's get into it. Just a little bit about the company. We're in Frankfurt, Germany. I run North America for us. Our core competency is hazardous material storage. In North America, we really concentrate on the flammable side of things. We do acid and a variety of other things, but really our core competency is this. It's the technology is excellent that we'll discuss, and the different ways that the market approaches flammability and fire resistance is quite diverse. So that's really be my topic going forward. If I look at hazardous materials, and we need to define that initially, hazardous material is anything, or let's say it's an item or an agent, which could be biological, chemical, or physical, right? Which potentially could cause harm to humans, animals, or the environment by itself, of course, or through the interaction of other factors. That's the part that becomes a little tough and puts it a little bit out of our control. We also got to pay attention to a couple different varieties of that hazardous material. So how does it act as a raw material as they bring it in the facility? What kind of products are made out of it? What's it mixed with? What does it become? But also in its waste, right? So maximal allowable quantities of flammables can't be reached or can't be overshot. But we got to understand it is all three of those that really drive what that means. And then how long do they store it? What do they do with it when they store it? What do they mix it together, etc. All of that is extremely, extremely important in that whole hazardous material process. Now let's, all of these that I show you there, those are all GHS symbols, right? We're going to concentrate on the middle one. The reason GHS really came on the market is simple. We all did it different. So in your country, it was different than what it is here in the US, which is different than Mexico. When you go to Europe, each one of those countries all had their own symbols as well to denote things. If we look at 4 out of the 5 of those, excuse me, 4 out of the 5 of those, it's very clear that we're all talking about the same thing, right? You got poisonous, you've got caustic, or it'll burn you, acidic type stuff, flammable, and then the last one there, hurtful to the environment. But the inhalation is quite different, and as you different pictograms, as we all had our way of doing things, they were different. The problem with that is our clients are multinational, manufacturers are multinational, so we need to create one system. Well, that was created. It really talks about the pictograms. Again, we're going to look at the one that's highlighted there, flammable type materials. So how did we store flammable materials? How do we store, not did we store, flammable materials? Technically, there's 2 different ways we can do it. We get it out of the building, we make an outdoor store that's shown here. That's for your bulk chemicals. People go to it and then take the chemicals back to their workplace, to the laboratory. Or we put it inside the building in a central storage room as shown here. And then, people go get their smaller amounts and they bring it back. Because in the laboratory space, we are not supposed to keep more than what we use in a day. That's kind of what the codes are written. Your country, my country, very similar, only daily use. Well, what does that mean? I can tell you as a chemist, what that means is I'm going to take whatever I need to the laboratory, I'm going to keep it there until it runs out, because I'm tasked with getting my task done. Nobody says you have extra time to go get it, and I'm not going to take it back. It just doesn't work that way. A lot of that has to do with training and then just the demands of the work. And some of it has to do with us scientist folks being a little bit of OCD and ADD, and we're extremely focused on our task, as I mentioned earlier. So, but if I look at that from the safety and the design side, in either one of these scenarios, whether it's the outdoor storage or the indoor storage, ventilation's done right, right? You're going to achieve your air changes. We've created class 1 or div 1 or explosion proof type environments. So if there is something that happens in that space, it's created safe. Now, what is not safe and designed for chemical use is the trip between A and B. The trip from one of these to the laboratory where they're going to do that. The elevator's not safe. The pedestrian corridor is not safe. Any place that they go between that has typical air changes. Certainly is not made for spills, breakage, or just overall influx of the nasty air. So efficiency goes away. It's not as safe, and ultimately that's really the way we do it. There's other ways to do things. So I told you we're going to watch some fun videos. Here's the first one. Some of the videos are a little cheesy, so I will apologize. Essentially what this shows is the process. So the gentleman on the left, he says, you know, I got to get my work done. Gentleman on the right, of course, is his superior and says, look, but you can't store the stuff in the lab. He says, so do you want me to get stuff done or not? Or a third solution is potentially you could provide me a safety cabinet here within the space. That conversation goes on. They leave it at get your work done and let's not talk about it. Of course, he's going to leave a lot of stuff in the space, and potentially here's the hazard that could happen. Okay, so is it possible? Yeah. Is it feasible? Yeah. It could be reality, unfortunately. We just need to if we educate them and tell them a better way to do it. This is where I'm going to walk now into the fire triangle and how we keep all of this apart, right? You had flammables, obviously had oxygen in the space. Well, let's look at the fire triangle real quick before I move on. If I look at the triangle, you've got an ignition source, which could be a variety of those things there on the left, an open flame, some sort of a spark, whether it's mechanical or electrical. Chemical reaction can be can get hot and create that ignition source very fast. I have personal situations in that one. And then of course, just your standard old spark. Again, think about now in your design how you can segregate these things from getting to the flammable substances, which we all know are going to be prevalent in the laboratory. And ultimately oxygen, if we get rid of that, we got a bigger problem. Right? So we can control the ignition source. We really can't control the flammable substance. Our process is trying to get less of that. You know what, I'm wrong. We can't control that flammable substance because we can segregate that. We can store it properly away from those other ignition sources. So we can keep that apart, and that's really the segregation that can help us. So let's have a little bit of fun. Let's look at some of these known dangers, some of the experiments. It's unfortunate if we weren't doing webinars and we could all sit together, I could show you this live. It's a lot more fun, but these videos will also be fun. So we're going to look at an open flame. This is a colleague of mine named Sven. Sven's going to make some noise, and Mr. Happy there's the yellow balloon. He's going to fill it with some gases, and let's see what happens. An easy example of this, an open flame, would be just a simple Bunsen burner inside a laboratory. What happens between gases and liquids and solvents in that video before, and really where the problem is. So, also, just for fun, pay attention to the sound meter. So initially, just a little bit of hydrogen, which we know hydrogen is pretty explosive. I'll show you later on that anywhere between 5 and 75% of a ratio in hydrogen in the air becomes explosive just under a little bit of an open flame. So now we'll just add a little bit of breathing air. So the scenario of this is an experiment that off gases hydrogen, or just a simple compressed air cylinder that's got a leak. So we went from a 105 dB explosion to a 108 dB explosion. This is a little bit less than a liter of gas in Mr. Happy there. So it's real. It can happen fast, and mitigating the dangers or getting them in different spots the way we provide safety. Pure oxygen makes things more fun. That's the means of this. There's also a lot of experiments that have that in it. Simple water molecules got 1 hydrogen, 2 oxygens, right? So anything that changes those can create that explosion. All right, also mechanical sparks and electrical sparks. So let's watch a video. This colleague of mine, Dominic, He's going to burn steel wool. The reason I burn steel wool or use steel wool in this experiment is, at this point, I'm thinking, yeah, well, Pete, you showed us hydrogen. It's extremely explosive. You've told it that. We know it's going to blow up. We'll still burn steel wool. And steel wool is many things that we think of are flammable. We completely think of everything. So, right, just a little flint-driven flame starter here. Dominic will create and start a fire with steel wool, and just a simple spark, right? So there's our mechanical spark. That could be anything in our chemistry and really the physical physics and different things like that. How do we mitigate and keep those components apart? Obviously, electricity. Then, if just a simple mechanical spark, electrical spark could be hotter, could be quicker. This is just a simple little 9-volt battery, so no AC, just DC. That's a fun little experiment when you put it in your tongue and you feel the charge. Well, same idea happening there, and of course that steel wool burns. So kind of fun. Got to pay attention to those type dangers as well. One gets hot, and this one gets hot very, very fast. Keep an eye, and we're going to say, Sven. I'll give you a little side story real quick. Sven's no longer with the corporation, and I'll get to that experiment later. I do have one experiment that I want to show you that a little bit PG-18. It's kind of violent and stuff, but we'll get there, and I'll show you and warn you ahead of time. So he's going to show us what happens with chemical reaction. I have personal experience with this. So in college, I made a mess. A friend of mine, Laura, and I, who was kind of my lab partner most of the time, we somewhat made the mess together, spilled. We took what we had made the mess of and put it in the trash can. Before we were able to leave the laboratory after cleaning up our mess, the trash can caught on fire, and there must have been something that was not compatible with what we'd put in the trash that created exactly this. So that was my first experience to a fire extinguisher, and man, did I make a mess. That gets hot fast. If you watch the heat gun that shows the temperatures on this, it's amazing how hot, how fast the chemical reaction can happen. Again, how can we keep that from happening? Education and segregation of these chemicals, storing them in proper places. Right, so there's proper boxes to keep things in. You guys create a proper and a very safe zone, and then we educate the end users, the scientists, on how to use those type technologies. All of those have to happen, or it just doesn't quite happen well. And then, as simple as just electromagnetic charge can happen. I didn't much believe this, and I was talking to a colleague that's in Europe, and he says, look, man, don't you remember at night, it was dark and you were a kid and you were hiding under the blankets, it was cold, right? You created sparks and you could truly see the flashes. I would assume in Canada, like here, in our drier times of the year, static discharge is a reality. So in this experiment, Dominic, he's gonna turn the flame off, right? He's got his gas running and just show us that electromagnetic shock there will create a fire. So again, there's a variety of different ignition points, ignition sources. The way that we can make those safe is segregation. So it's keeping the nasty chemicals away from the potential ignition sources, keeping things away from the ignition sources, the flammable substances. So we've looked at gases. Of course, there's liquids, right? We can think of a variety of different liquids, but solvents are also a real life danger. This one's kind of fun to show. I grew up in the Midwest. I was talking to Kevin on here before, and he's kind of Midwestern now in Edmonton, at least where he's at. But grain dust was a big thing that always popped in my mind as far as an explosive solid. But there's a lot of chemicals used in laboratory space as well. Dominic's going to just create a little fun out of some lycopod spores here. This is one I would not do if I was there with you. I don't know how to control this one. It's kind of interesting what can happen. Watch a solid turn into an aerosol can worth of explosions or fires. So understanding what our clients are using, understanding how to store them, teaching them how to store them and segregate them per your design. That's the goal. In this, he's using, of course, a open flame is our ignition source. His flammable material is the solids. and oxygen or breathing air is prevalent just because he's in an open environment. Pretty cool explosion that comes off this too. The heat that comes off this is absolutely amazing as well. Yeah, pretty fun. All right, so thanks for putting up with my my need for videos and enjoyment and stuff like that. We'll move into a little more technical stuff. I'll get you back to videos because they're fun, but let's be technical. The point in this whole thing in the fire triangle is understanding how to segregate, understanding how to, or teaching people how to store in your designs, creating that safe environment that truly takes out one side of that fire triangle. Okay, it's really that simple. Keeping that close to where people can store it in the laboratory space is essential as well. Don't make them walk to get everything else. Codes are okay with you putting that storage right there within that space. So let's talk about two different terms. I'm going to use paraffin oil or the old school lamp oil as my example. We're going to talk about flash point and we're going to talk about auto ignition point. So at a given temperature, 40 C for paraffin oil, there's enough vapors that are produced that become flammable. So vapors are produced off the chemical, they mix with the surrounding air, they change into a flammable mixture and they can be ignited. One misnomer is that the chemical itself or the liquid itself is what burns. It's really little vapors that sit on top of that. Okay, I'll show you an experiment as we go forward that'll give you that idea. So each chemical has a flash point, meaning if I heat it up to its given temperature, if a ignition source is presented to it, it will catch on fire. Okay, that's pretty clear. That's pretty simple. But something that's a little harder to wrap your brain around is the auto ignition point of that thing. The auto ignition point says is if I take paraffin oil and I raise it up to 220 C, just on heat below, heat in the environment, without a ignition point actually touching that chemical, it will catch on fire itself. So auto ignition point is very important because that's how fire resistance in cabinets and rooms and things like that are measured. They don't want the internal temperature to get to 220 C, a little over 400 F, and that becomes what is measured as flame resistance. So typically the integrity of a cabinet or a room doesn't get broken through by the fire itself. It's the heat from the outside that penetrates the walls and gets to the inside, getting a temperature to read its auto ignition point. So what does that really mean? Is it linear? Is there any correlation between the two? Not really, unfortunately, right? It's not that I can tell you it's a bell curve. It's not that I can tell you it's linear. Each chemical's got a different flash point or auto ignition point, and the bell curve or the change between those two can be significantly different or very small. If you look at paraffin oil, it's got a relatively high flash point, relatively low auto ignition point. Gasoline, right? So gas at -4 F, it could catch on fire if any type of ignition source are given to it, but it's got to go all the way above where paraffin oil is. And then acetone, ethanol, methanol, those are kind of standards. I throw those in there just so you can have an idea what that means. So flash point, if you heat something to a given temperature, you give it a ignition source, the vapors in the surrounding air will catch on fire. Auto ignition point, if I take it to a said temperature, it'll catch on fire itself. Okay, hope that's clear. All right, so let's talk a little bit about explosion limits, right? And mixtures in the air. So when things start to off gas, the International Building Code also references boiling points. Boiling points are important because the more that's off gas by a chemical, depending on what temperature it starts to off gas or put vapors into the room, or if I have a spill or I have a bottle that breaks or anything like that. Let's look a little bit about mixing ratios, and then how a rich mixture, explosive mixture, and a lean mixture kind of work together and what those truly mean. So we're going to invite Sven back to our room. This is where things kind of get hairy for Sven. It's not immediately, it's a little bit throughout the process. I'll warn you before we get there. So his process, he's going to put drops into a glass bottle. It already sounds fun, right? And then he's going to induce an ignition source and see if he can make things blow up. I mean, it's just simply that fun because we're trying to figure out where explosion limits are. So 250 ml bottle, 1 drop. No worries, of course, right? He's going to shake that up and mix it into the air. It becomes just, you can't see it, anything like that. Everything's cool. He's going to induce a ignition source. And we'll kind of see where that gets him. Close your eyes, maybe. All right, so nothing catastrophic. 1 drop, 250 mils. Obviously, that's not enough. I mean, I was pulling your leg a little bit, right? Nothing's going to happen with 1 drop and 250 mils, or 500 mils. Sorry, I keep saying that incorrectly. It's 500 mils. Now he's going to put 4 or 5 drops in. At this point, I feel like I'm just kind of stringing you along, and of course, nothing's going to happen. He's going to shake this up, and it's going to go right back into vapor. He's going to put an ignition source. He's got more bottles there, and obviously the fun happens at the end. So you can't see the chemicals. 5 drops, 500 mils. No worries. He takes the lid off. Everything's probably going to be pretty cool in this. Just the opposite. So, really the point behind that is, guys, it doesn't take too much chemicals into the vapors. The reason I tell you this is ventilation is extremely important. Your air changes in your lab space, your air changes in your buildings, air changes in the cabinets are all extremely important. So let's see how far we can really take that. So put 10 drops in. All right, now what's going to happen, right? If you're squeamish, I wouldn't watch this part. Sven's got nice looking digits and cool looking jewelry and stuff on, but as I mentioned earlier, Sven's no longer with us. He's a good dude though. Just this is a rough experiment, and he didn't really pay attention to standards. So it doesn't become explosive. What happens, right? So 1 drop, nothing. 5 drops and 500 mils, it goes crazy. And whatever he put in there, who knows, right? It was a good example of not the liquid burning, but the flames on top of it burning. So it's simple. I make light and kind of have fun with that. It's a lot more fun, the explosion and stuff, when there's sound, and I can do that in front of you. But really what we saw is an example of lean mixtures, right? Something that's below an explosive. It's not a flammable. That's the 1 drop in the 500 mils. Then we get into the LEL, the lower explosion limit of a chemical. And unfortunately, that 5 drop scenario covered somewhat of the LEL, but on some chemicals, that LEL all the way up to the upper explosion limit can be very catastrophic, create just terrible explosions under a minimal ignition source. Natural gas is a great way to think of that, right? There's natural gas explosions that happen quite often, unfortunately, if they're not too lean or too rich. The last scenario was it was too rich. There was too much chemicals in that bottle. It only became flammable and non-explosive. So the whole fun behind this is ventilate, ventilate, ventilate. Make sure you have the proper air changes in your rooms, in your storage rooms, in your facility, and in your cabinets. Yes, in your cabinets. The problem with chemicals is in flammable cabinets is everybody looks at those and says, ooh, that's the stinky cabinet. Well, the problem behind that is the exposure level and chemicals and stuff that are in that are just absolutely bad for people, right? You get to that point, the explosion limit or the exposure to people is 10 to 1,000 times less of the LEL. So if we get to a LEL, those people have been exposed to those chemicals forever. So vent your cabinets, vent your rooms, get the right air changes. It's essential. This list shows you kind of the correlation and LELs and UELs and like the other numbers that I showed you, there's no real correlation between the two. Hydrogen, 4% to 75% is explosive. Silane, which that's the tracer gas that we see in natural gas. That's what you smell, that rotten egg smell. It's 1.5 to 98%. Anywhere within those ranges, you're going to have an explosion. That's why it's so bad. And then again, propane, methanol, ethanol. I put those up just because those are more common in the lab space. So ventilate. You can do that whether by venting to the outside. There are some carbon filtrations that are out there. All of that will work as well. All right, so auto ignition point can't be reached. That's the importance of fire resistance, right? So you got to keep the fire and the heat to the outside of a cabinet, to the room, to the storage room. So you got to create a box that keeps that heat to the outside. Number two, to prevent from explosion or overexposures, we've got to ventilate those two processes. So examples of how not to do it. Due to our time, I'll go through these really quickly, but you know, I showed the video that was kind of a joke, but here's reality. These are just videos we talk about. In the cabinet world, people talk about there must be a 3-point latching hinge. NFPA only addresses that. NFPA or ULC only addresses that in the cabinet world if it's metallic or if it's wood. And the reason those two need it is because they bend and turn and can't have 10 minutes of fire resistance even at that point without those. So you'll see that to the rest. Again, other ways, got to pay attention to the waste. Got to pay attention to the waste, just not the internal side. So does having places to store inside the space mean inflexibility or any of that stuff? You know, it allows them a quick means to the product, but it does not create a safe environment. There's all kinds of flammable stored when we don't provide the right solutions on the inside. So cabinets in specific, there's 3 types that are out on the market. The first one has no fire resistance at all. You'll see about 3 minutes of burn resistance. My next couple slides, I'm going to show you a video of these burning, so you'll get the understanding behind that. The one in the center, it's got UL or ULC 1275. Now your country's tougher to get the UL trademark, or the UL Canada is tougher than UL. Some companies choose to have ULC or UL, and then of course you got Factory Mutual, which both countries recognize. Your building codes are hoping to see ULC 1275. Ironically, if us Americans come to Canada and get the ULC, our UL already takes that as acceptable. I can't take a UL American approved cabinet to your country and get the approval because your test is a little bit tougher, which I think is awesome, by the way. And then of course on the right side you get 90-minute fire resistant cabinets. So let's watch these things burn. It's really passive fire resistance versus active. So the 2 on the left, whatever happens to them along the way happens to them. The one on the right, there's things that happen inside the European design of cabinets, or these 90-minute cabinets that increase the amount of fire resistance they can have. So let's watch this video together. So the one on the left is that single-walled cabinet, no registration, no approval from any codes or anything like that. So it gives you about 3 minutes fire resistance, right? Are they still out there? Unfortunately, there's still a bunch of them that are out there in the market. Then we'll move on to the FM or the ULC 1275 cabinet. Both are tested relatively the same criterias. Of course, ULC, as I mentioned, is a little bit tougher, but it still has that 10-minute criteria. 3-point latching hinge, et cetera, and what happens when explosion or the fire resistance is done. Doors blow open, chemicals come out. On the inside of these cabinets, there's about 1 liter of chemicals and then a 12-pack of aerosols. Not of Molson Ice, it's only noon, 12-pack of aerosols. And then the 90-minute cabinet's going to run on for 90 minutes of testing. I'm going to spare you to watch that on the time, just so I can keep my time frame and show you some videos. But it's really the difference between no standard, 10 minutes or 90 minutes, and what you feel safe in designing around. To me, if we create our high hazard rooms We create everything that we know within a space to have at least 90 minutes of fire resistance. Even our 2-hour rooms only have 90 minutes of fire resistance because we put a stinking 90-minute door on it. Codes allow us to. So 90 minutes, I would try to achieve that in all scenarios. There's a bunch of products out there that have been tested to the 90-minute standard that'll also meet your codes, right? So they're going to be ULC, and they're also going to be EN tested, right? So you get the best of both worlds in that. You know, and I ask everybody, is 10 minutes really enough? And you know, 90 is going to make things a challenge. Pardon my bad cartoon here, but you know, getting people out, protecting our people, protecting our first responders, and then everything else matters to me. But I want to get people out, I want to get people there, and I want everybody to leave those situations safely, because we've created together the best design and the best products to give them that safe escape. So putting fire rated cabinets, 90 minutes inside a laboratory space is 100% safe, period. I'm going to show you a quick video here. This talks about in general the way the 90-minute cabinets work. I talked about passive versus active. Passive means I have a piece of metal. So 10-minute cabinets are a box in a box. You've got a box, and then you got an 1.5-inch air gap, and you've got another box behind it. When they are burned, that air, sometimes a little bit of insulation, provides that safety. The way you can achieve 90 minutes and the cabinets that are tested the EN standard, things start happening on the inside of this. This gives you a good example of what I'm talking about. And it's pretty typical amongst the 90-minute cabinets. They all actively fight the fire. I'm sorry, not fight the fire, but resist the fire. I do think this is funny. Pay attention to the gentleman in the purple shirt. So our esteemed researcher walks up, pulls the drawer out, says, "Yep, that's flammable. I'm going to leave it." And of course, he leaves everything open. Now, what I think funny is in good Southern U.S. fashion, watch who's the first guy out the door. The guy in the purple shirt, right? I like to give my German colleagues a lot of trouble over that, and they of course produced the video. But so if you leave drawers and doors open, of course you got to use a fusible link or some means, right, to close those things, because that's extremely important. You got to get the door closed to keep everything safe on the inside. When you're ventilating, because we've talked over and over about ventilating, I know everybody who leaves here is going to ventilate their cabinets going forward, or their rooms, or whatever it is. You've got to close. You've got to seal up around all the perimeters. So not a 3-point latch, because that just holds things open or holds things closed, we hope. But sealing up the gaps is the way to do things. So a lot of means of doing so is putting an expanding material in all the gaps, and then using an insulation type board that sweats water to keep the heat from the inside. Can't reach the auto ignition point on the inside of things. Okay. And then ultimately, the rest of that's marketing, and I don't want to show you that. But the gist and to keep in the mind is, how do you achieve 90 minutes versus 10 minutes, and it's active fire resistance versus passive fire resistance. So, you know, here's kind of how things test to the standards. Yeah, there's a lot of heat on the outside, and you can't reach the temperatures described on the right there. 356. Some standards talk about an increase of temperature. Some people talk about a max end of temperatures. It just depends. It's all chasing that same. Don't hit the auto ignition point of paraffin oil or that 400 degrees in general on the inside. So that's it on kind of standard stuff and flammables. I did allow us to watch enough time here to watch one more video, and then we'll conclude for questions and stuff. But as you walk around space, another thing that we're just missing in North America in general is the way we take care of these flammable gases. We saw hydrogen. There's a variety of different flammable gases that out there, acetylene and stuff. So here's a cool video that just says we ought to pay attention to this type technology. If it's a flammable gas, we need to get it in a fire-resistant cabinets. There are 90-minute fire-resistant cabinets that are on the market that will keep people safe, because these explosions are quite nasty. And here's a fun video from an Air Force base out in Finland. So everything I've showed you right now that's burnt and had fun. The Germans don't do that in Germany. We go to Finland to do that type of work. I'm not sure why, but the Finns enjoy us blowing stuff up there. So of course this gets nasty, so they've got us way out in the back corner. But quite interesting here. We're going to blow up a hydrogen cylinder, pretty typical. We're going to burn up a acetylene and an oxygen cylinder, which is pretty typical in welding carts or anything like that. Another thing to point out is along the way, all the fire tests and stuff we've seen on the 90-minute cabinet, that even though it's not vented, the duct stubs and stuff are cuffed wide open because they're made to close themselves. So also one of the means in North America that we do to keep things safe is we put sprinklers on top of the fires. Well, if a solvent fire happens, right now I have a solvent that's lit on fire on top of water, right? So water tends to spread things. The solubility doesn't work so well. And, if you think of these things leaning against the walls and the designs and the way that we do things so they don't fall over, this is a catastrophic boom that happens here. There's definitely better means out there. There's technology out there that exists that's tried and proven. Matter of fact, it doesn't allow that to happen. All right, so 6 minutes, that hydrogen cylinder blows up, and I mean, that's catastrophic. I don't care what 2-hour windows, doors, rooms, etc. We've got created in the space. It's not going to keep us safe. This one's a little more fun. So we throw acetylene and oxygen. It's getting windier in the day. That's the reason of kind of all the back work that's going on there. The guy hurries a little more at this point. He says, all right, man, it's on fire. I'm out. That explosion would have scared me as well. We can solve this by protecting our tank farms of chemicals, or if we put them in the laboratory space, putting them in a fire-resistant cabinet, ventilating them. NFPA kind of looks at this, but it doesn't address the fire side of it at all. NFPA 55 is what addresses it. Now, huge explosion. That's a acetylene tank. There it goes out of the bottom right after 9 minutes, and that's the oxygen tank. So that explosion itself is completely just acetylene. And then we create that flying projectile of a very forceful oxygen tank flying out of the way. So there's a better way to deal with these flammable cylinders. It's out of the scope. It's something that I've never thought about in my 20 years of doing laboratory safety products, right? But it is truly, there's a better way to do it. The technologies that are out there, you can manifold them, you can pipe through the ceilings. They all have that intermittent seal that you could see in the ceiling, so they'll close around those gaps and things. And again, they should be ventilated and stuff. I'm going to save your time. Here we are at 2 minutes prior to, so I'm going to move on. This cabinet's going to burn for 90 minutes. It's got a 90-minute fire resistant on it as well. And the fun thing, and I'm going to ask this question at the end, if you get it in your mind and you want to answer via chat, how do we put what happens after 90 minutes and this thing doesn't blow up? I'm not walking up to it. I can promise you nobody on the call would walk up to it. So how do you do? What do you do at that point? How do you get this to either go out, not a good option, or blow up? If you got an answer, put it in the chat. Things to consider as I close. Where is this project? Where are the people? Where's the fire extinguishers? Where's the means to get out of the building? Am I downtown? Am I in a field? How close are the first responders? How long is it going to take people to get out of the space? Saving people's lives is our #1 goal. First responders and the people. And then yeah, we need to save companies' assets. We need to save our clients' stuff. But we need to save people. That's our goal. This is truly a life savings conversation or consideration as well. So I typically talk to people about those 4 things, right? And each one's got a different reason or a different conversation that's based behind it. So to conclude, It's not the liquid, it's the vapors that burn. So we can't always see a flammable experience or atmosphere, right? We have to be extremely important. I show you those drops, and I show that kind of as an interesting slide, but to put it in perspective, if I were to pour a shot glass into a 55-gallon drum or 20-liter drum, 200-liter drum, sorry, at that point, I come up with 55 gallons of an explosion or explosive atmosphere. So it happens fast. It's small spills. It's walking from A to B, from our control rooms to the other in a corridor that's not vented properly, and we create explosive atmospheres real quick. So storage is closer, more efficient, more economical, and safer. Also need to ventilate everything we can. Ventilation is there's the joke that what is it? Dilution is the solution for pollution, right? Same idea in explosive atmospheres and things that'll hurt people. Ultimately, in your specs, right? How we train people, let them understand your technologies, the way you created the space. Have whoever wins the tender, the casework guys, whoever's supplying this cabinet, the fume hoods, all of that stuff. Get people up to speed on your life safety devices. And honestly, to me, a 90 minutes is the only solution that's out there. Technology's tried, it's proven. A lot of companies out there provide it, and truly it does segregate and help people store safely. With that, I'm going to close. I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of this group. I'm heavily involved in the States at I2SL, which is kind of a sister company of SL Canada. So the opportunity to be here is great. My contact information is there on the screen. Please feel free to email, call, use me as a resource. I'm happy to be that person for you. So if there's any questions, I'll open it up to that point.
All right. Thank you very much, Pete. That was an excellent presentation. As Pete mentioned, his contact information is there. We have a few questions rolling in, and while you're typing your questions, keep in mind, I think the open-ended question is, what to do after 90 minutes if such cylinders aren't released to pressure or explode. So, Pete, there's a few questions. First question is from Scott Shreenan. Do you have a recommendation for air changes within a storage room and a storage cabinet?
So, ANSI kind of tells us, ANSI and industrial ventilation talk about anything, 4 to 12 in places where we deem to be hazardous. You'll also see that go up to 16 when it's deemed to be extremely nasty. When I look at a storage cabinet, I want to run 50 to 100 CFM through it. I don't really look at the air changes. 150 is a number that's used globally for air changes within a cabinet itself. If you dedicate 50 to 100 CFM to that, that'll more than get you to that point, and it stays quiet. It's not noisy at that point either. That's a great question.
All right. Next question from Robert Bonin. If you ventilate a cabinet, does it have to exhaust direct to outside for each cabinet, or can it go into the exhaust? Perhaps that means general exhaust. If you ventilate a cabinet, does it have to exhaust direct to outside for each cabinet, or can it go into the exhaust used for the fume hoods? What code covers this? So I perhaps interpret this as how you connect your exhaust from the cabinet to the other exhaust sources in the lab. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah, I take that as well. The same. That's a good question. Unfortunately, I have to defer to the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. There is no true code that says if you do X, then you must do Y. A lot of places that I do work, I've only truthfully I've had one project. There was 250 cabinets and flammable cabinets in Chicago, Hoffman Estates. The fire marshal made us put them on an independent system and do it with PVC. So we ducted them all to the outside on an independent system, right? We were able to gang them together, couldn't put them through the other exhaust, even though it's laboratory exhaust. But I only tell that story because it's very weird that he wanted me to use PVC, because when it burns, it produces chlorine gas. It's typically a no-no. So quick conversation with the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction, and they'll help dictate kind of your thoughts on that. My typical process and where I would start is trying to duct it into your other exhaust coming out of laboratory space, whether that's a fume hood, whether that's a snorkel, something like that. And they don't need to be on independent lines. That's where I would start your design and communications with the AHJ.
All right, great answer. Next question is from Stephen Shamshuk. We have several existing, probably installed in the 80s, explosion cabinets that are vented, but there are no dampers. Is this an absolute no-go and should be corrected immediately? Are there retrofit solutions? So two-part question.
Okay, so you'll have to talk to the manufacturer and figure out what code they were made to. If they came from the 80s, the current design of cabinets really is from the 70s, the 10-minute cabinets, late 60s, early 70s, and figure out what code that they comply to. Make sure they comply to a code first off. And then putting a damper on them, that can be done. But I would call, if it is a certified cabinet, I would essentially then get with the manufacturer and say, have you done testing to the certification with them vented? If not, then I would try to figure out how to address that. I understand that can be a big budget ticket, but I would start with what cabinet it is it certified, and then I would get with that manufacturer.
All right. Next question is from Yvonne LaChance. Would it be the same for indoor cabinets like bathrooms, since some flammable products are available as cleaning products? Does that make sense to you, Pete?
It does. So typically in the States, we look to have 25 gallons of storage. I think a few chemicals, if they're stored by themselves in the bathroom. If you're going to go to the point of putting those chemicals in a flammable cabinet, I would vent it. But I'm not going to tell you one cleaner under a sink needs to be stored that way either. You're going to have to pay attention to your local codes and really dictate to what they tell you to do. I know bathrooms typically have higher air change rates, so a cabinet could fit within that world. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know a good answer for that. But to me, if you're going to put a cabinet there, I would ventilate it itself.
Okay, great. Perhaps a comment from Dan Curley here. My understanding is that the fire code in Ontario requires that the ventilation from a cabinet cannot be connected to the general exhaust / fume hood. So perhaps this is to your comment on authority having jurisdiction that would dictate how this should be approached. Is that something that sounds about right to you?
Yeah, I would agree. Like I say, what I say would be a starting point, and I would hope with my design that I could do that. But if you've got to ventilate them according to the AHJ, I don't know if it's the same there. There's some counties that could be different to the adjacent counties. I can't even look at a city or a state in the U.S. It's typically just that AHJ, the code or fire marshal, plan reviewer, right? That's going to ultimately go out to that space who dictates it. And unfortunately, my joke is the code is in the eye of the inspector, right? So hopefully that person can direct us correctly. But yeah, you certainly talk to those local folks. They have a lot more jurisdiction than I do.
All right. Question from Wincy. Have you compared the Aseco's gas cylinder cabinets with other suppliers' cabinets? How are they different? Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I'll let you handle this one.
Okay. Just in general, we all have our own technologies. If you, the key is to find equivalent fire resistance. So 90 minutes of fire resistance, regardless of how that company achieves it. If they have an EN tested mark and they've done 90 minutes, it's only EN because the European standard is the only one that sets the 90-minute criteria. If it has 90 minutes of fire resistance and it's code and registered via that code, I would deem it equivalent. And the same thing, if it's a 10-minute cabinet or a 30-minute cabinet, where I don't deem them as equivalent as a 90-minute cabinet compared to a 10-minute cabinet. And mind you, if a cabinet says NFPA 55, it has nothing to do with fire resistance. It talks about the door's got to close, it's got to have a window, it's got to be ventilated, but that code does not look at all into fire resistance.
All right. So that appears to be it for questions now. You did mention what to do after 90 minutes. Now, I haven't seen any commentary on that, so perhaps you can give us a hint on what could be done for that.
No, I'm gonna keep that $100 gift card
Okay.
I had in my pocket since nobody. No, I'm kidding. All right, so it was only a virtual gift card, so don't everybody start typing at once. I don't have a $100 gift card in my pocket. Literally, we had 2 Finnish snipers that were 300 meters away, or 100 meters away, sorry, and they were trained on those 2 cylinders. So after 90 minutes, I think 93 minutes, we kill the video. It runs up into near 100, and everybody gets far enough away, and they shoot the cylinders through the cabinet, and they blow up.
All right, so authority having jurisdiction, I guess, in that case.
That's it.
So I believe this is it for questions. Great presentation, Pete. I think we'll close it out here. Thank you everyone for attending. This presentation will be available on YouTube. It has been recorded. And if you have any further questions, Pete provided his contact information, so please feel free to get in touch with him. Pete, do you have any other closing remarks, or are you good to close it out?
No, I'm great to close it out. I certainly appreciate everybody taking time to, watch fire over lunch. Hope you enjoyed.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. We're going to close it out.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin.